Okay, now that we've finished our reference sketch, it's time to jump into Illustrator and start creating vector art. This is where the majority of our artwork is going to be produced. So I'm going to press File in Illustrator and New. By the way, I'm using Illustrator CC Creative Cloud, the newest version that's out right now. First thing I'm going to do here in the new document box is I'm going to type a name. I'll type bear v1 because I'm drawing a bear and that's my descriptive title of my personal piece, and v1 for version 1. I like to version out my files just in case there are any major changes. Then I can go back and revert to a previous version. So maybe I'll make a major change later on in the artwork. I might give it a new version name, so I might save it as bear v2, and maybe I don't like it, so I'll revert back to bear v1 and work from that again. It's just my way of kind of keeping track of things and moving forward in a safe way. All right, moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about size very quickly. One of the really cool things about Illustrator is pretty much any box where you can type a number, it will do automatic conversions for you. So you'll notice that I have the document set up in points right now, and that's how I want it. I am going to set this to 10 inches wide. Now you'll notice I didn't type it in points, I typed it in inches. That's perfectly fine in Illustrator. If I press tab, it will automatically convert it to points. Pretty cool. Same thing for the height. I'll type 8 IN for inches, tab, automatically converts to points. It's really a nice feature. A 10 inch wide by 8 inch high canvas isn't really that big. But the reason I'm choosing to do that is because keeping your actual physical dimensions of your image smaller helps with pushing raster effects through Illustrator. And we're going to be working with raster effects, so we want to keep our files fairly small. What you want to do is think about the ratio of your final document and then try to shrink it down using math. So in this case, maybe I'm making a 20 inch wide by 16 inch high document, and I'm going to cut that in half to 10 inches by 8 inches, which is going to work really well for me, and it's going to help with the kind of the processing power of the computer. It won't overwhelm the computer. All right, if you need to set a bleed, go ahead and do that. I'm not doing that for this piece, but if you do, there it is. It'll set, if you set 1, it'll be reflected throughout the whole thing. So maybe if I had a 1/2 inch bleed, you'll notice that it's all locked in because this little setting is clicked in right now. But I'm going to go back to 0. All right. Finally, in advanced, this is collapsed a lot of times, but I'm going to open it up. In the advanced settings here, we're going to make sure that our color mode is set correctly. If you're printing, set it to CMYK, RGB for screen. Raster effects, make sure it's at 300, especially if we're printing, which we are in this case. 300 is going to keep things safe, keep things easy. You can actually change that again later. So if you accidentally don't set it in the beginning, it's pretty easy to change once you get into the process. I'm going to press OK. And I've got a new blank canvas or blank artboard. You'll notice on the right-hand side, I've got a whole bunch of panels opened up. This is how I like to work. Some of these panels are going to be really important. Pretty much every panel I talk about today, in fact, all of the panels I talk about today can be accessed up here. If you go up to the window menu, you'll see there's a whole list of them. So if you can't find one or one's not open, always feel free to reference that as we're working through today. One window you'll definitely want open, or one panel you'll want open, is the appearance panel. Really important. The layers one is probably another one you're going to want to have open the whole time. Okay, now that our document is ready to go, I'm going to jump into Illustrator and I'm going to start blocking in the composition. And what I mean by that is I'm going to be creating kind of just basic shapes that represent all of the main elements within the composition. I'm going to start just by drawing in the background, adding a background color. So what I'll do is just rename layer 1. I hate having layers just called layer 1 and layer 2 and stuff like that. So I'll call it BG for background. So that's going to be my sky. I'll select the rectangle tool, and I'm going to come up here to the color panel. I keep my panels open just for easy access. and I'll mix a color that I like that kind of goes along the lines of what I'm looking for, that dead blue gray kind of color. All right, so you notice this is kind of, it's a little bit on the light side right now. As we move along, other colors will work with it to make it look a little bit grayer and more mechanical. All right, so this is just a foundation. You'll also notice that I'm working outside the bounds of the artboard. For what we're doing, it's inconsequential. You don't need to be within the artboard. The artboard will actually crop the art for you on export, so don't worry about it. Some people might consider it sloppy work, but to me, it makes sense because it gives me extra art to work with when I have art kind of on the edges of that artboard. You'll see what I mean a little later. I'm going to now add another layer, and this is for the ground. So I'll add in my ground. I'm going to make that a little darker. So you'll notice I deselected my sky shape. I can lock that layer too if I'd like. So I'm making this a little darker, and I'm looking at my reference sketch. You can't see that, of course, but I've got it next to me. And I'm kind of going to rough this in, just similar to what I have on my reference sketch. And probably, I just hit the A key to use to change my pen tool to direct select. And I'll kind of smooth this out a little bit. And I want this kind of the depression here in the ground. That's going to draw focus towards my bear in the composition. So I want to get that right. So I'm adjusting that using the direct select tool. Okay, now that I've got that, I'm going to lock that layer, and I'll move on to the bear. I'm going to do the bear's body. I work with the pen tool in Illustrator almost exclusively when I'm drawing objects. I personally don't like to use the pencil or brush tool for art creation. I use it for more like effects and smoothing and things like that. Now remember, I'm making this bear, the color of this bear, a little warmer. So I'm adjusting my colors. Okay. So I'm going to come in here with the pen tool and draw in my bear now. Now, something about the pen tool I want to just discuss really quickly while I'm working here. It takes some practice. This is not a tool that most people pick up right away. It infuriates some people. I'm going to zoom in just a touch so I can get some fur details in here while I'm moving along. It takes some practice to get used to. And I'm not going to lie, for most people, it feels pretty technical. I am used to it at this point. I actually enjoy working with the pen tool. I may be a freak of nature in that regard, I don't know. But to me, it's fun. I like the process. I love the control of the pen tool. It is pretty much, in my opinion, unrivaled in that regard. So I'm looking at my reference sketch and trying to kind of come up with the basic shape I'm going for. All right, and I'm going to move on to my other side here. Again, working outside the artboard at the bottom. That keeps things kind of flowing. It keeps things moving fast. I'm going to undo that. I want to make this bear a little fatter. So I'm going to bring this up. I'm actually going to add in some of the fur detail a little later. You'll notice that I'm kind of toggling between the pen and direct select. I'm doing that by holding the command key on the keyboard, and that allows me to reposition points on the fly. So there you go. If you're not used to the pen tool and you want to use it and you want to feel the control of it, practice. It'll come to you. Anyone, absolutely anyone can learn the pen tool. No exceptions. I've never met a single person who's incapable of learning something like this. Just takes practice. So I'm going to finish this bear shape up a little bit here. And make some minor adjustments. but I'll zoom out here to get a look at the composition. But I mean, essentially it's shaping up the way I want it to. The shapes are similar to what I've drawn on paper, and it's moving in the direction I want it to move. So there it is. I'm going to continue blocking in this. I'm not going to bore you by having you watch me block everything in. So I'll block some more stuff in, and we'll come back for the next step. Let's take a really quick break from blocking in our composition to discuss the appearance panel. I have the appearance panel open on the right side of my screen. I keep select panels open on the right just for easy access while I'm working. Now the appearance panel, I'd have to say, if it's not the most important panel in Illustrator, it's one of the most without a doubt. It gives you lots of different options and controls in one easy place. So if you select any object, it will show the attributes of that object, the appearance attributes. It will show you the stroke, color, and you can see the opacity settings for that and any effects that are applied directly to the stroke. It'll do the same thing for the fill. So you can adjust opacity independently for each one. You can turn them on and off, the visibility that is. You can adjust global opacity for that whole path or object right down here. And then you've got some more stuff. You can apply effects. You can add a new stroke. You can add a new fill. All appearance attributes will appear here in the appearance panel. You can clear the appearance. Now, one thing before we move on, we are going to be using this a lot while we're going through this process. We're going to be coming back to this, so I'd highly suggest you keep it open. One thing before we move on, in the flyout menu on the upper right hand side, let's go through and make sure this setting, New Art has basic appearance, is turned off. That is going to be crucial. It's going to allow us to use any object within the composition as basically as a reference for how you want to create the next object. So all you'll have to do is select an object, and whatever appearance attributes that object had, the new one you will draw afterwards will basically retain those same attributes. It's a really useful thing. It allows you to create quickly if you want to kind of use stuff you've already built, appearances you've already built. But I highly suggest you keep this open and definitely turn that off. It might be a little tricky to get used to at first, and you'll see why as we move along, but it's really helpful. Okay, so we're moving ahead and blocking things in. You'll notice that I've stepped forward a little bit in the process here. I've added some new objects in, and I've added a new layer over in my layers panel called Pipes 2. I want to talk about this really quickly because it kind of addresses organization. We're going to be talking a little more in depth about organizing things, but right now I just want to talk really quickly about it. When we're building our composition, what you want to try to do, if you can, is organize things and keep objects basically like grouped in layers by like object. So I could group all the pipes together in one layer, but it would get really messy, so I'm doing it by levels of depth. The farthest level in depth, like back, receding back into the composition, I labeled pipes. That was my first one. So those are going to be small. They're going to be in the distance. Kind of in the midground, I have this new layer called Pipes 2. And then in the foreground, I'll have one more called Pipes 3, which will be a lot closer to us, and therefore the objects will be bigger. The colors will be more, I guess, saturated and such. So anyway, with that out of the way, I want to do one more thing before we move into our next part of this unit, and that's I want to discuss really quickly some more ins and outs of the pen tool. I'm going to do that. I'm going to draw another one of these pipe trees. So I'll draw it really quickly. Try to not spend too much time on this. Okay, so I like this interplay between hard angles and curved lines for making spooky forms. I think it kind of gives a funky and spooky feel to things. So that's what I'm going for here, because I want this to look, like I said, like sort of a wasteland. And I'll pop this guy up here, and then we'll swing this in here. There we go. Now I want to edit this a little bit. So what I'll do is I want to move this point, for instance. I'm holding Command. I get direct select. That shows up when I hold Command, and I'm able to move that really quickly and easily. All right. If I want to curve, say, the bottom of this form, I want to curve that. I'm keeping my pen tool is still selected. I haven't switched tools. Okay. What I can do is I can hold the Option key down, and you'll notice I get this black arrow with a little curved line. I can drag that down or up, whatever, and now I've curved that little path segment. Just in case you're wondering which version of Illustrator I'm on the most recent version of Adobe Illustrator Creative Cloud, the one that came out in January 2014. So if you're working on an older version of Illustrator, the tools might be slightly different, but it's not going to be so different that it wouldn't make sense. Okay, so other things I can do. If I want to curve like an angled line, so here I've got this angled point. It terminates here. There's no curve on this particular point. If I hold down the Option key, I get this caret, okay? I drag it, now I've curved just that point. Now that's only directly on that point. Now I don't want that curved. I actually want an angle there. So that's that. I'm going to draw another little shape on here. Kind of add it in. Okay, and then I'll be adding some more stuff in. But those are just some quick ins and outs of the pen tool, and it just shows you how easy it is to actually go in and edit things. You don't have to go and redraw the whole thing. You don't have to Command Z or undo a whole bunch of stuff. You can actually go in and do some really quick and easy edits. Okay, so I'm pretty far along in blocking my composition in. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm feeling like I can start moving into details pretty soon here. I just want to sit back first and assess the entire composition and see if there are any changes I want to make before I go into that. So I don't know if you remember, but in the sketch process I mentioned that I thought that this plant here could be a little bigger. I also feel like this arm can be a little bigger. So I've already made sure I've unlocked both of those layers in the layer panel. I have a layer called plant and a layer called bear. And I'm going to hit the V key on my keyboard to switch to the regular selection tool, and I'm going to select both of those items. I'm going to deselect the bear's body. So now I've just got these two objects selected, and I'm going to resize that. I'm holding Shift to lock in proportions. Hopefully you know that by now. It's kind of important. All right, anyway, I think that's about the size I want it. So it's a pretty big arm, it's a pretty big plant. I'm going to be adding in some more detail. Some other things I want to change. I'm not feeling like these pipes in the foreground are exactly what I want in terms of size and placement. So I'm going to change them very slightly. In the layer panel, a quick thing you can do, you can hold the Option key down and click this little area next to the right of the eye, and that if you hold Option down, it will basically lock everything except for the layer that you want to be unlocked. It's a great thing to do. Makes it so you don't make any mistakes. I'm going to resize this. I'm going to make it a little smaller. Just going to rotate it a touch. So my goal with this composition is to draw as much attention inward towards the bear as possible. So you might notice that all of these objects, these tree type things, are all kind of pointing inward. They're all pointing toward the bear. So compositionally speaking, I'm trying to draw as much attention to that center as possible. And then I'm using really kind of hot colors for only very small objects. I try to limit the use of really bright colors and crazy colors to just pops of color. And you'll see how effective that is later. Right now it's very effective because there's not a lot going on. So these red birds, I'll unlock that layer quickly to show you that. These red birds really stand out, as does the red plant in the middle here. One thing I'm not really happy with is the color I've chosen for the leaves and the stem on the plant. So I'm going to change that quickly. I'm just going to tone it down a bit. Actually, I'm going to bring the magenta up. And I think I'm going to I'm holding Command and I'm dragging one of these down, and what that does is it takes all of them down together in unison. So proportionally changes them. So I'll probably tinker with this a little bit later on as well to get it where I want it to be. But it's getting closer. I just don't want it to be so hot. That green was really vibrating against the red and against some of the other elements. It was just a little too much. I'm going to be adding gradients to these as well later, so they'll all kind of tone down a bit, and they're all going to get a little more subtle and nuanced as we move forward. But I'm feeling pretty good about this. I may make some more adjustments to the composition, but for the most part, this is the direction I'm heading. So before we start detailing our illustration, let's take a quick moment to talk about organization a little bit. First, we're going to talk about layers in Illustrator. I actually know a lot of illustrators I've spoken to who don't really use layers, even with complicated artwork. I personally feel like this is a mistake, especially when you go back to edit. It just makes it so easy to go into edit things and quickly understand what's going on with the structure of a document when you have layers organized and labeled really well. If you're ever handing your art off to someone, it's really great to layer it for them so they have an idea of what's going on. Now, Illustrator is an object-based method of creating art. It's a little different than Photoshop in that way. So Photoshop works specifically with layers all the time. You're manipulating layers, but Illustrator's layers are basically objects or groups of objects. So the main levels of these layers that I've created, so if you notice on my layers panel, I've got a whole bunch that I've created. Inside of each of these, so if I go up to birds, for instance, if I look down here, it shows I'm going to call them sublayers. You can think of them that way, but all they are individual objects within that layer. So every single one of these is a path or an object within that layer. I don't go and name those personally. You could if you really wanted to, if you're completely OCD, but for the most part, you don't really need to worry about that. So I'm just going to close that up and we'll look at it this way. So each of these layers is kind of an important section of our composition. So what I like to do is when I'm creating my artwork, I'll label it as I'm going along. I've pretty much created all the layers I'm going to use. I might add a few more, but just for the sake of teaching, I'm going to add one more right now. While I'm adding this layer, I'm holding the Option key on the keyboard. I'm holding the Option key and I'm pressing this new layer button at the bottom of the panel. And what that does is it brings up this layers option window, and then I can name the layer. So we'll just call this test layer. One other thing you'll notice is that the color is down here. This is the color of the points and that you're drawing when you draw a path on that layer. Brown is the best color to draw with, and there's some really awful ones in here. Black and yellow are absolutely horrible to draw with. Gray is not so hot either. The best ones are actually at the top of the list. Light blue, light red, green, medium blue, magenta, cyan are all pretty good. Cyan's a little bit on the light side, but usually it works out for me. I kind of cycle through those. So with this one, brown, I would probably just switch it to light blue. It's going to work for me that way. Don't worry about any of these settings. We're not dealing with these right now. If you do have other needs, you can switch these on or off. But right now, let's just keep them at the default settings. We don't need to change them. I'm just going to press OK. So now I have this new layer. It's called Test Layer. It's in my layer panel. One thing I like to do, I like to make sure I use practical names for my layers. I've seen people name their layers ridiculous things. They think they're comedians. I think I can be pretty funny occasionally. This is not the place for it. Try to keep your layers as simple and practical in naming, in terms of naming, as possible. You want it to be easy. You don't want to name a layer Kevin and then come back and wonder what the hell Kevin is. So just, be easy on yourself. Name them practical things. Don't be clever. Another important thing is to try to isolate important objects on their own layers. I'm going to actually ditch this test layer now because I don't need it anymore. I'll throw it in the trash. But let's look at these other layers and see how we've grouped things. So my most important part of my composition is the bear. I put the bear on its own layer. There's going to be a lot of detail in that bear, so I want to have it separated from the other things. Now on the other hand, the birds are going to have a lot less detail, and so I'm grouping them on one layer together. The two birds are on one layer together. The TV is on its own layer because it's going to have a fair amount of detail. The plant, mostly because it's the only plant, and so on. I already talked about how I've grouped the pipes in different layers, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So everything is kind of grouped and separated to make it really easy for me to go in and edit. If I open this file up 3 years from now, I'm going to know exactly what I was doing, and it's really helpful. Another great way to keep your artwork organized and to keep your workflow moving in a sort of a faster way is to populate your swatches panel. Now you'll notice right now mine is empty. I haven't been populating my swatches panel because I've been trying to just move through the art quickly. I'm going to take some time right now to do that. And it's a really simple process. For instance, if I want to grab this red for this bird, I'm just going to click the bird. I'm going to come up here into my swatches panel. It shows my fill color. I just drag it in. It's that simple. Same with the TV. Same thing. Just drag it in. And I can keep doing that. It's really fast, really easy. I usually keep mine organized as I'm moving through, so that similar colors are kind of next to each other, and you can always slide them around and reorganize them as you see fit. It's pretty easy to do. So I'm just adding those in. Get the sky color, put that over here, and you'll notice it's got a nice array. I'm almost creating a gradient there. I'll bring this brown that I used for the branch, and I also used that for the back of the television. I'll bring this green in, put it next to my red, and I'll get the color that I used for my bear. I'll kind of separate my cool colors from my warmer colors, my nature colors from my more metallic, or I guess, you know, man-made sort of gray blue shades. And I think I've got almost all of them. I'll just get the arm color, even though that's just there for contrast. Okay, so I think that's it. I've got those all in. It was pretty fast. Another thing you can do with colors that's really helpful is you can create color groups. There's a couple cool ways to do this. One way you can do it is just by selecting a series of colors, and we can go here, new color group. I can name it if I want. I can also press that down there. I can call these nature, and it groups them together in a folder. I can do the same thing with my man-made ones. I'll do it from down here this time, and I'll call these metal. Perfect. There they are, all grouped together. These groups are really helpful. There's another really cool way to make them. What you can do is say I select an object. I can actually press that, and it will create a little color group just from that object. That's a pretty cool way to do stuff too. It's really fast, really easy. Now I don't need those, so I'm just going to Command Z and undo that really quickly. To finish up this organizational unit, one thing I want to talk about really quickly are graphic styles. Graphic styles are a quick and easy way to apply an object's visual attributes to another object. So you can basically save the attributes of one object and apply them to another. So let's just quickly pan our screen over. I'm just holding the spacebar down and panning over. I'm gonna let go. I want to work off the artboard because I don't want to use this art that I'm going to be using as a demonstration in my final piece. So I'm just going to quickly draw a shape. Okay, so there it is. Now I want to make a gradient for this. So I'm going to go to my gradient panel and just apply this black and white gradient. That's fine for demonstration purposes. And I'm going to show you how you can do a quick diagonal gradient, because I use diagonal gradients a lot and we will be using them in a later unit here. So I hit the G key on my keyboard to go into the gradient tool. And you'll notice I have this line across that's basically showing a visual representation of how my gradient is applied on this object. I'm going to drag a diagonal line with that. And now I have a nice diagonal gradient. It's applied in a different way. I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to feather this object. So in my appearance panel over here, I'm going to go down to Effects, press Stylize, Feather, click Preview, and you'll notice now I have this nice soft edge. So with that in mind, if I had a new object or a different object somewhere in the same image, maybe I have a few of them, just going to draw a few different things, and I want them all to have the same attributes. Easiest way I could do that, I'm going to select this object and I'm going to create a new graphic style in my graphic styles panel. You'll notice it shows up right here. Now all I have to do is select both of these objects. I'm simply using the regular selection tool, so I'll hit V and I will hold Shift. So I've got both those objects selected. Click that, and now they all have the same attributes, the same appearance attributes. If I select them all, you'll notice in the appearance panel it's all the same stuff, and that's how you do that. That can be really helpful, and you'll see why in a little bit. We're going to be creating some shadows using some effects, and we'll be using some directional gradients, and if we can apply those settings to those appearance attributes to a whole bunch of objects en masse, it's a lot easier than doing one at a time. We've laid a nice solid foundation for our artwork, and we've gone over organization, so now we're ready to jump into details. Well, I guess almost ready. One thing I want to cover really quickly is masking. Masking to me is the easiest way to make Illustrator feel faster and make the workflow in Illustrator feel a little bit more realistic and looser and less technical. I like to use masking to add details to my objects without having to do any of the technically precise movements that happen a lot of times with things like pathfinding in Illustrator and just trying to match the edges of paths against each other. So we're going to go over that really quickly. There's a few different types of masking, but I want to focus mostly on something called Draw Inside mode, which to me is one of the best tools in Illustrator, hands down. It is so useful. Almost everybody who I've known, who I've talked to about this, and if they didn't know about it at first, once I've told them about it a little bit, it's kind of been one of those life-altering moments. So I really think this is going to be super beneficial for you, especially if you have kind of a little bit of trepidation about approaching Illustrator and you're a little bit cautious, or you feel like it's a little too technical for you. I think this might take a little bit of that out. I'm going to start right now with the bear here, this bear shape, and I'm going to just demonstrate a little bit about how Draw Inside mode works with this bear shape. So what I'm going to be doing is, my goal is going to be to create some furry sort of shading along the left edge of this object. To trigger Draw Inside mode, there's a couple different ways you can do it. There's one way that's slow and there's one way that's fast. Almost always the way that's fast is the best way to go. In this case, the fast way is to use the keyboard. First, let's talk about the slow way, just in case you need a visual. On the toolbar on the left side of my screen here, at the bottom, there's a little button that allows us to shift drawing modes. You'll notice it says press Shift D, and that's what we're going to be doing. But right now, I just want to show you where it's hidden. If you hold this down, you can switch to it right here. It says Draw Inside. I'm not going to do that. To me, that's a waste of time. If I hold Shift and press D 2 times on my keyboard, Shift D twice, you'll notice I get this nice line around my object. Okay, this dotted line around the corners. I deselected my object because I want to draw inside of it. I don't want to manipulate the object. So I've deselected it. I'm going to press P to trigger my pen tool, to get my pen tool to come back up. And I'm going to use a method for drawing inside that I find to be really fast and easy. I'm going to go over to my appearance panel. I'm going to change my opacity, transparency, blend mode to multiply. And I'm going to change the opacity, knock it down to about 40%. Since I have, in my appearance panel, since I have new art has basic appearance turned off, it just, what this has done is it just inherited the same color values as, and the same appearance attributes as, as I already had set for the bear's body. So all I just did was take that bear's basic base color, and now I've created a multiply 40% version of that. I'm going to start drawing inside my object now to demonstrate this a little bit. Hopefully that wasn't too daunting or technical. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to make this kind of jagged to make it appear as if it's fur. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but I started outside the bounds of the bear. I sort of like starting outside the bounds of outside of the boundaries of things. I think you may have become aware of that already. So now I'm really quickly closing that path and deselecting it, and there it is. Really fast. Okay, if I want to alter that or edit it, I'm going to hit the A key to toggle the direct select. Maybe drag some of these in a little bit so I can edit that quickly. I'm only editing it because I didn't really like the curves of it. It's kind of not contouring the way I want it to. All right, really fast, easy. There it is. Now I want to add another one. I'm just going to show you one more time how this works. I'm going to use the exact same image attributes. I'm not changing anything. And I'm going to go over top that other one. This kind of feeds into what we'll be talking about when we do detailing a little later. Quickly going through here, making this jagged sort of fur shading, and closing the path really fast, back to the beginning, done. So there it is. That's how Draw Inside works. So easy, so fast. If you know your pen tool, you can move just as fast as I just did. It is really quick, really easy, really great way to do quick detail work and not worry about it. Okay, so I'm trying to sell you pretty hard on this Draw Inside thing, and I personally think it's terrific, but I have to admit, and I have to warn you, there are some strange behaviors that go along with it that you kind of have to get used to. So to make sure that it doesn't get frustrating, I'm going to go over those really fast. First thing I want to talk about is this kind of weird behavior that occurs after something becomes a Draw Inside object, for lack of a better term. So I made this bear shape a Draw Inside object. In other words, it's masking out these objects that I drew inside of it. All right, normally any object I click, I'm using the direct select tool, if I click that object anywhere on the object, it will select it, like this arm. Now I'm going to click this bear object, I'm going to click it right in the middle. I'm clicking it right now. Nothing is happening. This is weird. Okay, so this can be really confusing. What happens when you create this direct select object is, or I'm sorry, Draw Inside object, is that it kind of almost behaves as if it's hollow, as if there's no fill. To mitigate that, to make sure I can select it, all I have to do is click the edge. So I click the edge and it selects the object. That's it. So just make sure you do that, then you'll be able to do any editing you'll need to do. Also, to jump back into Draw Inside mode, once you select that edge, so I'll select the edge, and all I have to do is hold Shift and press D 2 times, and there I am. I'm back in. Now I can redraw, I can re-edit. I can always edit things inside, but now I can draw more stuff inside this object. Okay. All right, so that's not too bad. Here's a tricky one. I'm going to switch to this TV now. Now, I created this TV and I have this cutout in the middle. So what happened is when I made this, it formed a compound path, which you can see over here in the appearance panel. I also added some rounded corners. Actually, I'm going to quickly expand those so that that appearance attribute goes away. So now I just have a compound path. Draw inside mode really doesn't work that terrifically with compound paths. I'm going to demonstrate really quickly some of the issues and some of the frustrations that come up with it. It can be pretty annoying. This is the most annoying thing that Draw Inside does. The other one I think is pretty simple. So I'm going to hold Shift and press D a couple times. I get my dotted lines. I'm going to create a quick wood grain pattern in here. So I'm going to use the same method I used before, where I'm using the same color as the television. I'm just switching the opacity, the blend mode to multiply, and I'm going to turn the opacity to 50%. And I'll draw a really quick wood grain. So I'm just drawing this detail in really fast. And I'm going to deselect that now. Now I'm going to try to select it with direct select again, and it is not happening. I'm clicking it, and it's not happening. So it's just selecting the entire clip group. I don't want that to happen. One really cool thing that Illustrator added, I think when Creative Cloud came out, was they added this thing in the layers panel called locate object. It's a little magnifying glass at the bottom. If you have an object selected and you press that, it'll zoom right to that object. Super helpful, especially in this case, because in this case, to make it so that we can edit this object that's clipped inside of this compound path, one of the easiest ways to do it is to lock the compound path. And there we go. Now I can edit it. Okay, so now I can move the points and edit it. But this is, honestly, this is a little frustrating. This gets annoying. Not the best way to work, but I think it's a decent compromise given the other, the other ways you could work. So I'm going to unlock that, and I'm going to reinitiate my Draw Inside, and then I would probably, continue to work inside of there. In addition to Draw Inside mode, there are a couple other types of masking that Illustrator has to offer, and we're going to quickly go over those. We're not going to spend as much time on them because I don't think they're quite as useful in the long run, especially for the process we're using as Draw Inside mode is, but you should still know about them. One of them is called an opacity mask. Opacity masks are located in the transparency panel in Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to shift over, so I'm holding space, I'm shifting over to a place off my artboard to demonstrate this really quickly. All right, so really fast, I'm going to make a box. All right, and now let's say we want to cut out part of this box or occlude it in some way. What I'm going to do is I am going to create a black object. So I'll press the L key to make an ellipse, and I'll put this black circle over top of my box. I'm going to now hit the V key, the select tool, and select both objects. I'm going to go to my transparency panel, and I'm going to press make mask, and oh no, they've disappeared. Well, we have to tell Illustrator what type of behavior we want this to have. So I'm going to turn off clip, and you'll notice it now has the behavior that I actually was looking for, what I was looking for is I wanted to have that black object mask out what was behind it. Okay, so this black object, that circle, now becomes a mask, and you'll notice here when I have them both selected, that down in the transparency panel, it shows the object, and then it shows a link to the mask. Kind of a weird behavior here. This is a little bit different than how Illustrator normally works. This kind of works in a similar way to the way Photoshop works with masks, is that here we've got the object selected, and if you want to edit the actual mask object, you have to click this button right here, or this area, this thumbnail, and that will allow you to alter the actual mask. Okay, so now I've altered the mask. And then I have to click back on the object to enter back into normal Illustrator world. It's kind of like you're in this black hole when you're over here. So that's that. Opacity masks, not too difficult. I like to think of when I'm working with masks, I just like to make it simple and think anything that I draw in black will hide an object or hide something. Anything I draw in white will show. So just keep that in mind when you're working. All right, so I'm going to erase this really quickly. Now, really fast, let's talk about one more type of masking. We're going to talk about clipping masks. I like clipping masks. They can be really useful sometimes. I'm going to make a few red circles. Okay, almost like dots. And we want to mask these within a certain shape. Let's say we want to put all of these in a box, but we want the box to clip out the edges. So we want this kind of weird, funky pattern to show up in a box. Whoops. I'm going to deselect that object. I'm going to click a different color, and I'm going to draw a box over these. All right. I'm going to select all of these objects, and I'm going to hit Command 7. Now this is also in the Object menu under Clipping Mask and Make. I press the keyboard shortcut because I think it's about 1,000 times easier. Up to you. There you go. Now they're all trapped in there. They're all in the masked in that object. These are really helpful, really useful. You'll notice one different thing, one different behavior that this takes on that Draw Inside doesn't. When you use a clipping mask, it basically zeroes out all of the appearance attributes for that mask object, so that rectangle that was green is now just clear. It has no appearance attributes. So it just shows it clips everything out and becomes kind of invisible. So that's one way it's a little different from the Draw Inside mode. So this is a really useful type of masking for certain applications, but I think for the most part, when we're doing our artwork today, we're going to stick with Draw Inside mode. We might use opacity masks a little bit. It's up to you. In my piece, I'm not sure. I haven't gotten there yet. So we're going to get there, and that's what we're going to move into now. We're going to move into the detailing portion.